Hi everyone, Sue Tetzlaff with you here today in Fans of the Framework. Good to be with you. And today I wanted to start talking about this idea of recovery or post-pandemic planning. And, in a lot of instances when a business or an organization faces a traumatic event like a fire or a tornado or something like that, is that the event is, usually in a short time frame. The trauma happens to the business, and then, the damage is really obvious, and then there's a decision about, how to recover from that, rebuilding, those kind of things. And so obviously in this situation of the pandemic, the assault to our organizations, is not sudden and quick. It's long term. I mean, week after week it's going on, and damage and trauma is happening to our organizations and to our communities. And so, responding to that, recovering to that, is kind of unknown territory. It's not like we can look at, how have others done this in the past, because there's really not a lot of past precedents to say that, wow, yeah, this is how you do it. This is how you recover from an event like this. I was reading an article the other day, and they had a phrase in there that says, "We may not recognize the world on the other side of this." And I got to thinking, we may not recognize our country on the other side of this. We may not recognize, our industry on the other side of this. We may not recognize our organizations on the other side of this. Heck, we may not even recognize ourselves on the other side of this, right? So, how do we start planning for, what's next? I also have, seen a lot of, literature out there talking about the fact that, there's going to be winners and losers in this. And, even when you look at post-recession information and what happens, during and after a recession, there's a lot of amazing business growth after a recession, of new industries that pop up, new businesses, things like that. Businesses can grow stronger. So there's winners, but then on the other side of that, there is losers. I can't find it, but I remember, this was more than a decade ago. I remember reading an article about individual trauma, and how, some people, they were researching how some people, when they experience a traumatic event, now I'm talking about a person here, not an organization, that when an individual experiences a traumatic event, that, some people post-trauma never get back to their normal or their baseline of, functioning or health or whatever pre-trauma. And then some people do get back to where they were before the event happened. But then there's, a group of people that become better and stronger because of the traumatic event. And actually they look at the traumatic event as something that was actually positive in their life. And so, I think that's my hope for, our healthcare industry and each organization in it, is, how can we be on that side of being the winners? How can we be on that side of recovering to baseline or better? And what does that even look like? And what's the process going to look like to get us there? Because at first we have to get ourselves through this. It's not over yet. But what I want to kind of, impress upon you is this idea that planning for that, is something we need to start doing right now. And as a healthcare leader, planning just during normal times, can be a very challenging feat. It's kind of a combination of prediction and hope and, those kind of things when we're planning just during normal times. but now planning during a crisis and considering all the unknowns and external factors post-crisis can make planning even more challenging. The idea of, I kind of want to frame this, kind of put this in a way maybe that you can have a good takeaway from this of, what can I do in follow up to this information here today is I want you to think about, two types of planning going on right now. One is the actual pandemic planning and the efforts in your organization to plan for the pandemic. And then I also want you to think about the planning for your organization. And, in our organizations, we usually have, planning processes, a planning cycle anyway. And so I want you to think about those two types of planning. One is for this pandemic, and then one is the planning that you would normally do for your organization. And so with the pandemic, we're thinking about what now? What do we need to do right now, here today? And then what's next? So with the pandemic, and because of its, continuation, that it wasn't like a sudden event, like a fire in our business and the fire's put out and it's over. It's going on and on. So we have to say, what now? What do we have to do right now in the situation? And then we have to plan, what's next for tomorrow and next week and the week after, based on all the information that we know internally and externally. So what do we do right now and what do we do next? And we have structures in place like our incident command and, Office of Emergency Services and all of that are organized to be planning and executing what now, what next for the pandemic. So we have systems in place to do that. But in parallel to that right now, we should also have systems and structures in place to be bringing our planning bodies together as well for the business side. And so I do see some evidence of that right now. The what now and what next for the business planning of your organization. So the what now, some of the activity I see going on there is like, what services do we have to keep operating? What services do we need to provide differently? Do we have to furlough or lay off people? Those kind of things. So that what now business planning, I see that going on right now. But what we need to also engage in at the same time is what's next. So that business planning. So, if you have your incident command running right now and the people that are planning for what now, what next with the pandemic, what I would encourage you to do is also have that decision-making, idea-generating, planning body going for what's now related to how do we, day-to-day keep our operation running. And then also start planning that what's next. And obviously that what next can be very difficult and challenging to figure out. Like I said, in a normal planning cycle for a business, that can be really difficult as well. So some people will say, I'll even hear this like when I work with an organization, a healthcare organization, to do a strategic plan. They're like, so why do we even need a strategic plan, 2, 3, 4, 5 year strategic plan for our organization when there's so many unknowns? And how do we create a plan when there's just so many unknowns in our industry? And so, like I say, during a normal, planning situation, people, often question, how can we plan for our industry or for our healthcare organizations when there's so many unknowns? And now given this situation, that's just even, just multiplied with so many unknowns. So, in that case, some people might just shut down and say, well, we just can't plan. We just can't do it. But, I'm just appealing to you to start to think about, the business planning, your strategy for how you're going to deal with what's happening right now in your business, and then what's next. Because, you can start thinking about what do we know? Not everything is unknown. What do we know? And, one of the things that we do know is there's going to be resource limitations. When you set up your strategic plan and your goals for this year and your projects for this year in your business, in your healthcare organization, you did that considering what resources you had available to you to be able to fund those strategies and those goals. Well, that's just changed, right? It is known that that has just changed. You don't know exactly where it's going to fall out yet, but you know that has changed. So those plans that you had made, you know they're going to have to change. And so we have to start that process of adjusting. I'm one of those people that say you need to have great plans so you can change them, right? So that we can adjust them. But, it's easier to have a plan and then adjust it versus just, winging it, having no plan at all as your baseline to adjust from. So we know there's going to be resource limitations at the organizational level to fund what we had planned to do this year. But also we have to think about, there's going to be resource limitations at, the individual level. So for instance, our patients even going to have, are your community members even going to have resources for, having elective anything, if there's a copay or deductible when this is over, those kind of things. So we have to start thinking about what are those knowns and plan and adjust our current plans. Look at our current plans and adjust them based on, what are all the things that we know are different now. The other thing we need to do is consider what are the hypotheses, right? We're doing that in the pandemic right now. We're adjusting our plans based on new information and new hypotheses. And as those are being borne out, then we can adjust the plans. We need to do the same with our businesses. What do we know now? What do we hypothesize could be the options? Now, you don't have to go down every rabbit hole to explore every possible, hypothesis about how this is going to impact your business. But you got to start thinking about what are those possibilities and what are we going to do about it. I mean, this is not the time to wing, our business decisions. We need to start basing them through a planning process of consideration. What are the knowns? What are the hypotheses about those things that are unknown? And what is it, what's the course of action for us as a business? So, for instance, one of the hypotheses about this is there's going to be a slow ramp up afterwards. So that, we're just not going to turn the lights back on to every service we shut down. And so there's going to be a ramp up process. There's other hypothesis that there's going to be this huge surge afterwards related to, deferred primary care, deferred preventative care, preferred elective cases, those kind of things. So that there might actually be a surge. And that we need to be prepared, for this pent-up demand. Or it could be both. For some services, there's going to be a ramp up. For other things, there's going to be a surge. So, who's thinking about this in your organization? Who's starting to create those hypotheses, these plans, and figuring out, what are you going to do about it? And also, another thing to plan for, another consideration that you can be planning for right now is, what did we learn in this process? And, what do we now see differently because we're experiencing this? So, many organizations started to do things that they didn't do before, such as telemedicine or childcare. Or they started doing things differently, such as how they communicate, relationships with agencies that they didn't have before, etc. So what did we learn? What did we start doing? What did we learn from that? And are we going to continue that after this is over? And how can we plan for that so that when this is over, some of those good things that we learned or put in place actually are part of what we do that makes us successful when this is over. So that's another consideration too in this planning process. And then also, what did we stop doing during this crisis? And is it reasonable to bring this back up? Is it even, something we need to bring back? And so, I've seen this happen with an organization where they had a question mark about a service line of whether or not they were going to continue it. And so, that was on their strategic plan to make a decision this year about discontinuing a possible service line. Well, during this crisis, it was one of the service lines they had to shut down. So now it totally likely leads them to knowing what's the impact of that service being shut down versus just hypothesizing what's the impact. They actually had to shut it down, and now they have to consider bring it back up. They have new information that will allow them to make a better decision. It was a decision they were going to make anyway. We've had partners tell us that they're even questioning, their physician recruitment plans because, now they're seeing that, some of their physicians right now aren't busy, right? And so what's the timing of now bringing on new physicians? And that's a question we would have never really thought of before, especially if we're an organization that's growing. We would never pass up an opportunity for an amazing recruitment of a physician. And now that's even being called in question because of just really knowing what we know. And starting to plan about what's the impact of this and how can we be successful afterwards. What decisions make us successful? Which ones actually put us at more risk or cause more damage? But the one thing I really, truly want people to think of, I know that organizations are going to be thinking about their service lines. They're going to be thinking about their finances. They're going to be thinking about their, resources and their processes and things like that of how they might look differently after this crisis is over. And as we go through that recovery and getting back, into some sort of normalcy in our operations, which, as I started with, we may not recognize, what our industry or what our organizations look like when this is over. But the one thing I don't want people to miss out on thinking about when they're planning for their organization, when this is, in the recovery phase is, what happened to your people? What happened to your culture in this? What's been positive about that? And what has been maybe some stress on your people and your culture. And we can't just, go back to thinking business as usual, get these services up and running again, etc., without thinking about the people. We're a service industry. And the people are the ones that are going to be really important to the success of how we do after this is over. And, some of them have been furloughed. Some of them have been just, really, in trauma from fear. Maybe they've had losses. Maybe, you've had coworkers ill. Maybe you've lost a coworker, a family member, community member. There's going to be grief. There's going to be, recovery from trauma and pain and disruption of life. And, as we know it, and I think as an employer and as, an organization, we can't just bury that we have to put in our plans. How are we going to acknowledge and recover from the individual and collective human response to this trauma? And that as an organization, we have to plan for that, and we can't be silent on it. We need to have some sort of intervention, some sort of process, some sort of support planned out. Because, just like we're taking care of our employees right now, making sure they have protective equipment, making sure, that they stay resilient and not burn out and all of those kind of things, we also need to plan for that in the recovery period, that just when, we kind of get the, okay, we can all go back to business, that, we're not going to be the same people. So we need to acknowledge and we need to recover and we need to be mindful of our plans for that. Like I said, I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know we need to do some planning and thought around that. And in our company, we're really starting to reach out to experts and, dig into the research about helping our partner organizations and, our network of people of, what could be some of the response to this related to our culture and that recovery period for individuals to heal. But also, I think an opportunity with our culture of our organizations and our people is to take the opportunity to celebrate them. I know there's a lot of celebration going on right now and recognition and appreciation by, communities and the country about, the healthcare workers and the healthcare industry and its role and impact in serving our communities during this time. But I think in the recovery period, we're going to need to internally celebrate our resiliency, internally celebrate our ability to pull together and collaborate to, again, respond and mitigate the situation. I think we need to celebrate our creativity, and I think we need to celebrate our dedication to our communities and to our people. And so this recovery period, when we plan for it, don't forget to plan for how do we recover our culture and our people. So what now, what next when it comes to the pandemic? What now, what next when it comes to our organization? And we need to be planning. We can't leave this to chance. If we trust to chance, we must abide by the results of chance. We can't leave our recovery, our plan for what happens next to chance. We can't just wing it. And even though there's a lot of unknowns, our planning process for this is going to look different. It's going to feel different. It may not be on our normal time frame of when we would normally adjust our organization's strategic plans and goals. But we have to do it now. We have to put the structure, the people, the stakeholders in place. We need to start asking the questions. These were our plans. How do they need to be adjusted in light of this? And so, what's next? We have to plan for that. We have to have a process and people in place to plan for that. So, likely I'll be coming back in here and as we learn more about this and the planning and the knowns and the unknowns, and as we consider some more, tools or tactics for you in this regard, this is a place where we'll be sharing them. So look here in Fans of the Framework for more of that coming up. And for our partner organizations, also look forward to the resources specific to your journey initiatives and your plans with your employee-driven teams, your leadership strengthening, all of that, that will also be specifically working with you in that, really evaluation and reset process for your transformational journeys. So stay safe, everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye now.